Hello, and welcome to SciShow Talk Show, that day on SciShow where we talk to interesting people about interesting stuff. Today we're talking to Cara Nelson, who is a professor of Restoration Ecology at the College of Forestry and Conservation. Did I get that right?
You did, and I work in a program that's focused on ecosystem science and restoration that's in a department of ecosystem and conservation sciences.
Well, I'm glad I didn't have to remember all of that. So you're at the University of Montana studying restoration, studying conservation, studying ecosystems, and how to make them work and good and function in a world where we've already done some damage to them.
Over the last couple decades, we've realized that there are things that people can do, management actions that can improve degraded ecosystems. Mm-hmm. They include removing invasive species, planting native trees, etc. And really, across the globe, we now have this incredible momentum to get this work done.
So is that a lot of what your research is focused on, like figuring out how, like just how ecosystems function and what nudges we can do to get them in the right direction? And also is some of this like physical restoration, like removal of logging roads or to manage around invasive species? Like there's just a lot.
There's a lot of different types of ecosystems that are in need of repair. And my own work focuses on terrestrial ecosystems, so primarily forest and grassland systems. In my laboratory, we look at the efficacy and effects of different kinds of restoration treatments, as well as how those degraded ecosystems assemble. But what I'm really excited to talk about today is some of the work that we do with invasive plants. And the reason I thought it would be cool to talk about is because every single country has issues with invasive species. We here in the US have our evil villains of the plant world, like for instance, Leafy Spurge. But our species that we love, like lupin, like lodgepole pine, many of our familiar common species here in the Rocky Mountains are nasty invaders, are plant villains in other places.
Sometimes I look at like knapweed and I'm like, I'm supposed to hate you, but you're really beautiful.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I imagine people in other places might think the same about lupin because what a gorgeous plant.
That is exactly right. If you were talking with a biologist in southern Chile, they would be telling you that lupin is an evil, nasty plant that needs to be eradicated or at a minimum controlled on their landscape.
So when it comes to invasive species, like what are the things that we're most worried about? Oftentimes I think of them as like not useful plants. Like we tend to get a lot more whiny about invasive species when they start to like mess with economic production, like cattle can't eat them or they're gumming up the works at a hydropower plant or something like that. Of course, they also have negative ecological impacts. And so where's the balance between imagining those things?
Right. So first, to answer the question, we really have to talk about what is an invasive species.
Sure.
Because there's species from other countries, other regions that will move to a new location, but they're not necessarily invasive. We have lots of non-natives that we're happy to have here, including most of our food crops, right? Then we have other species that came in, you know, maybe intentionally for gardens, landscapes, et cetera, or maybe unintentionally, and they just exist here and they don't really cause problems.
But that's the vast majority of...
That's the majority. Yeah. A small percentage of species that arrive from other locations, whether intentionally or unintentionally, will really, really gum up the works. And they tend to have a few characteristics in common. They grow really fast. They start growth really early in the growing season. An example, cheatgrass cheats the other plants out of water because it can start growing as soon as the ground hits that freezing temperature. When it just is at freezing, it can start growing. And other plants, native species, require
give a little time.
A little bit more time, a little bit more warmth, et cetera. Another thing they have in common, we think, is that they in moving have escaped the other organisms that they compete with or that potentially eat them. And so that's the enemy release hypothesis. When they move, they are released from pressure from their natural enemies.
Right, and so that leads to just like a drop in biodiversity. The native species aren't able to compete.
Exactly. But there's a few more characteristics too that I think are worth mentioning, right? And one of them is that some invasive species, not all of them, release chemicals into the environment that make it difficult for native species to grow. And examples of this include knapweed that you talked about and leafy spurge. These species are called allelopathic because they release these allelopathic chemicals that tell other plants to stay away. Many of them also taste bad or are problematic for other species to eat, which gives them a competitive advantage.
Right, so when you're having, especially grazing, which is can be pretty intensive on a landscape, and like one plant doesn't taste good to a cow, then suddenly that's the only plant left.
And then finally, they produce a crazy number of seeds that are really long-lived. So many invasives share that in common. And so leafy spurge, which I wanted to talk about today, right, is probably the best example we have in the West, in western Montana and many other states in the West, of nailing each one of these characteristics that allows plants to become invasive. Each plant can produce about 130,000 seeds, and those seeds can live up to 8 years. The plant itself produces roots that go as deep in the soil as 25 feet and laterally out 15 feet. Oh my God. So imagine that you are trying to plant a garden and there's a leafy spurge plant and you pull that plant. Well, it's going to be right back there. If a leafy spurge seed, one of the 130,000 of them produced by the plant in your garden, the next seed starts to grow. Within something like 8 days, it can start vegetatively reproducing. So if you think like strawberries, many people have seen strawberries are connected through underground meristems. That's called vegetative reproduction, and it can produce a new aerial shoot and another one in as young as 8 days after that seed grows.
Can we make leafy spurge tasty to cows? No. Can we introduce their natural predators from wherever leafy spurge came from?
If you touch it, you can get a reaction, humans, because it will...
Wonderful, perfect.
It has a latex, a nasty chemical that prevents animals from eating it.
Okay. Every animal? Because they're like, goats can eat anything.
Well, so sheep and goats can eat leafy spurge. So,
good job, goats.
Yeah, but for many animals that ingest them, like cows, right? It can cause them to be nauseous, vomit, very problematic for people. They
don't just avoid it.
It's
they
really
eat it
toxic.
And makes them sick.
If you have a grassland area and you have one leafy spurge plant that comes in producing 130,000 seeds that can grow into new plants that are vegetatively reproducing, that can have roots to 25 feet deep, you're not going to have an area that your cattle can graze on or that you can use for recreation. And so leafy spurge has had a huge economic effect, both direct and indirect, across our landscape.
So what do we do? Do you have plans? It seems like we've gotten some grasp on how it's so good at what it does.
The common methods of getting rid of weeds do not work on species individually on species like leafy spurge because it is such a tenacious plant. Like I said, if you pulled it, manual control is something you can do with some weeds. It will, of course, come back. Or mowing, it will, of course, come back. If you have a very small population and young plants and you use herbicide, you could potentially be able to control leafy spurge. But I'm using the word control and not eradicate because almost any method you do can't really get rid of it off your landscape.
You've got several million 8-year lifespan seeds hanging around.
And of course, with each method that you try to control, there's effects. So if you use herbicides, the herbicides will kill leafy spurge, but potentially other plants. And one thing that my lab has been working on is what happens when you seed after you spray herbicides. And so we've been working in a greenhouse environment doing our dead pot project. We have sprayed pots, soil and pots with herbicide, and then we have been waiting various periods of time and planting seeds into pots that had herbicide sprayed a year ago,
And so
9 months
both
ago,
native seed
6
and-
months ago. Exactly.
And leafy spurge.
And the results have really surprised us. So we have found that germination of seeds of native plants is really severely reduced when they're planted into soils that have herbicides for a very prolonged period of time. And so why this is important is because on the landscape, if you remove leafy spurge, right, with an herbicide
Yeah.
or through any other method, you leave space open for other species to come in. So what will come in? Maybe more leafy spurge or maybe another invader because we have so much pressure with seed. And so because of that, when we do invasive species removal, we want to also seed with native species.
Right.
But when we use herbicides, we have this problem that we have to wait enough time that the seeds won't be affected in the soil. But something cool that we've been exploring, actually this has been being explored by the city of Missoula,
Yeah.
is using sheep to control leafy spurge.
Because they're all about it.
Yeah.
Do they prefer leafy spurge, or will they just also eat it?
Well, the cool thing about sheep is that you can encourage them to eat things that you want them to eat. So if you feed sheep leafy spurge for a while
Yeah.
and they go out on the landscape, they'll look for leafy spurge.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because they're dumb.
Well, or maybe they're smart.
Or maybe
they know,
that's-
hey, this is okay to eat.
Yeah.
And so they'll go out and eat leafy spurge. And
So you just pick a bunch of leafy spurge, bring it to the sheep, and you're like it's like a bloodhound. Like, sniff this, and now go out and get it.
yeah, so what's interesting is that the city is using this as part of their integrated plan for managing weeds. And there's been a herd of 400 sheep out in the hills around Missoula, which are really severely infested with leafy spurge. And the sheep are allowed to graze in the spurge-infested areas for a period of time, and then they're moved to another spot.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned that my lab likes to test the efficacy and effects of restoration. It's always really important to think about not just did we achieve our goal removing leafy spurge, but did we
how did
achieve
you
our
impact
larger
everything
goal?
else?
Our goal really was not to get rid of leafy spurge. It was to restore this degraded ecosystem. And so if the sheep were also having adverse effects on the native plants, then maybe they're not a great tool for restoration. So I had a very talented master's student, Eva Mason, who spent her time out in the areas that the sheep were grazing and counting stems of native plants and spurge and other plants to see whether the sheep prefer the spurge, what they're eating, and over what time period they start to eat the native plants. And her results were really cool because she found that the sheep actually do show a preference for eating the spurge once they've been trained on that until the spurge abundance goes down.
Right.
So then when there's not a lot of spurge left, they start eating some of the native species. And so they ate something like 80% of the stems they were eating were invasive species, and 20% were these native species that are so ecologically important and contribute to our ecosystem health.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that if you are effective at moving the sheep at the right time, they can be used effectively in areas where there's leafy spurge.
And at the end, you have sheep. So
Well,
that's good.
That's true. And the leafy spurge is super nutritious. It's a terrible food for cattle. It can kill them, right? It's an amazing food for sheep. It's high quality forage for sheep.
So why do we have so many cows in this country and not like goats like everywhere else?
Yeah, I can't answer.
Okay. We just like them too much, I guess. I don't want to kill a bunch of goats.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we
Right?
should, let's start can we just like get like a goat taco place opened up in this town? Sheep tacos? I don't know. That doesn't sound as good. For whatever reason. Are they so where do you get the sheep? Are these like local farmers who are bringing their flocks out?
Yeah, so there's a variety of mechanisms that are used to get sheep out on the landscape. I actually, in my own home, hired goats to come in my yard and get rid of blackberry, which was a real problem species in the area where I was living at the time, which was on the West Coast in Western Washington. And I called the company, Rent a Ruminant, and they came with their goats. I had 17 goats for 10 days. I actually didn't have them for the whole period. I had to call at about day 6 and say, get these goats out of here, because they had completely cleaned up the blackberry situation and were on to munching things that I didn't want them to eat. And so I think there's a lot of potential for people.
If you want to start a business.
Yeah, to assist, because invasive species is something that affects, in urban areas, urban parks, in, people's homes and landscapes, to open spaces, to large public land areas. So I think in restoration, it's a cool field to go into because there's a lot of room for innovation. The problems are really challenging, and they involve equal parts science and management.
Yeah.
So if you like to work in science and be immediately able to apply your results, working in ecological restoration is a cool place to be.
Also, you don't mind being outside counting stems.
There you go.
On transects, I imagine, for a long, long time.
Yeah.
You get really familiar with all of the species we have up there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. If you want to start a business, bringing goats to people, that is a thing that exists. And then also, you can have a taco truck.
There you go.
Is the ultimate destination for the goats. All right, I don't know who we're about to meet here, but we're going to bring an animal in for us to enjoy.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to share.
Yeah.
There we go. This is Willow, and this is Kaya. And these guys are ringneck doves or Barbary doves. They have like 6 different names because they're not really scientifically considered their own species. They're a domesticated version of a collared dove. Most scientists agree that they are a domesticated species of the African collared dove, but possibly also Eurasian. They can actually crossbreed with both of them. So you guys are kind of a mystery.
Oh. And they are bred as domestic.
Yeah, so these guys
fun, for people to have fun
have
with.
as pets. Yeah, exactly.
I guess that's
have fun with. I mean, that's what you should be having fun with your pet. Exactly. Yeah. Well, these guys were also bred because they can be white as well, and
throw them out at weddings.
Yeah. So let's just go throw some invasive species here and there and see how it'll happen. So a lot of times, and do you want to hold her?
Sure.
So just put your hand in front, and she will, and you stay right there. Gently step up. Would you like to hold her?
You're heavier than I thought you'd be.
Right there, and then she'll just gently step up.
You look little.
There you go. Wow. Yeah, well, they're about 120 grams. Pigeons tend to be more heavy-bodied, and I'm throwing out pigeon and dove as different species, but they're not.
Oh,
they are.
pigeons
they are an
doves.
order. They're a family.
Right,
yeah, and then.
But they are different species.
There are 310 different species in the family.
Okay.
Yeah, and so pigeon is just like a different word that most people use for generally bigger ones.
Okay.
And then people use dove for generally smaller ones, and so it's the common name has really messed with some.
So there's also multiple species of pigeon.
Yes, many from like the crowned pigeons that are like turkey size to like teeny tiny little doves that are like the size of a hummingbird.
Aw.
When a lot of people say dove, they think of this.
Right.
Often this, more specifically. So a small, white, cute-looking pigeon-type bird. They think of these guys as being released during weddings or other celebrations. But most of the time, people aren't doing these guys because they are not very good at surviving in the wild. You let them go and they'll just fly and then land and be like,
right.
I don't know what to do from here. So they use homing pigeons. So white homing pigeons.
And then they'll come back.
They come back, exactly. That's a much better plan for the birds and for the environment.
And they just breed them to be white?
Yeah.
Specifically so that you can throw them out at events?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. It's a whole business model. That's what they do.
We just throwing out lots of new businesses for you guys this week.
Willow was dropped off by someone at a pet store, and it's kind of weird. They're actually like, here, how much pigeon food can I get for this? And the pet store owner was like, none.
That's not
we don't
how
want
it
that.
Works. Yeah, we don't trade birds for bird food.
Yeah. And so he left, and then 5 minutes later he came back and put the bird on the table and left. So the pet store owner called us up and said, hey, we have a dove that's not eating. Can you take him in? And we had a little flock of pigeons, and I hand fed him to get her back to health. And I'm like, well, she needs to eat. And so I actually housed her next to a pigeon with 2 babies that had 2 babies. And then she started begging.
Aww.
So I was a baby. Aww. So she was a baby. She just didn't know how to eat yet. And so the pigeon mom actually adopted her, taught her how to eat, and then she was fine. Kaya was found on someone's front yard, like droopy wing, wasn't flying away. They just went over and scooped. It was in the winter too, and they scooped her up and called us up and asked her. And so she has a damaged wing there. She can't fly very well, but we introduced these 2. And Willow started cooing for her right away. And so we thought Willow was a male, and they bonded. And then she was laying eggs. And then a year later, Willow started laying eggs too. They're a bonded pair. You know, they do good. They both try and sit on the nest at the same time, and it's adorable.
Super cute.
Yeah.
Willow, looks like
very, very slowly.
Looks like she's missing feathers.
Yeah, it's part of the disputes of nesting that these 2 have worked out, is that she will remain on the nest even though it's her turn, and so she'll peck her and pull her back feathers out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Come on.
And not very nice. But also you need to share.
Yep.
So it's not hurting her, you know, that much. So I mean, it hurts a little bit to get them pulled out, but it's super damaging. It's more important that these guys have a social bond than to separate them to have pretty feathers. Speaking of invasive species, these guys are a pretty terrible invasive species.
Oh, really? They were in the U.S.?
Yeah, they were, well, the eastern collared dove.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Those guys, they were introduced in the 1980s, and now they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And they're great invasive species because they grow very quickly. They leave the nest at about 21 days. They incubate for 19 days, and then they leave the nest at 21 days. And then within 6 months, they can reproduce themselves, and they lay up to 24 eggs a year. So it's 2 eggs, and then they go build a second nest and have 2 eggs there, so they're constantly rearing. They have 2 nests going at the same time, mom and dad.
That was ever a thing.
It's nice. They have to make sure their calendar, their schedule is all worked out so the babies stay fed and warm. But and then they just keep going, and then halfway through the year, their babies are already reproducing, and so it's just this ongoing cycle. And they can eat pretty much anything. They can tolerate cold weather. They're just so prolific that even our native species that can prey on them doesn't make that big of a dent. So,
Got pretty eyes.
I generally think of like birds having one clutch a year or whatever you would call it.
A lot of them are going to be seasonal, yep.
Yeah, I know that about pigeons, that they'll just go until they can't anymore.
Yep. And these guys, their breeding life is about 10 years, but they they live like 12 to 15, but they can get up to 20 if they're well taken care of. But yeah, the pigeons, the rock dove, the pigeons, feral pigeons that we have now, they are also a pretty invasive species everywhere.
They can go and go. Well, they work well in cities,
Yeah, well, they are not scared of humans, and they can nest in. They have pretty crappy nests, and they can just go in tiny little spaces.
Their nests are such sad little affairs.
But you know what holds them all together?
Poop?
Yeah, it's like glue that they make themselves. It's like, here's kind of a nest, and then I'm just gonna sit here and poop on the edges, and then the babies just poop and it just like builds up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and
their poop
then you
can
just
actually
have to clean it off.
So much poop, and then it erodes paint and our buildings and stuff. But then also their poop can carry diseases, and it's not good for humans. It's wonderful for pigeons. They do a great job for themselves. But these guys, the domestic species, they don't do so well out in the wild. They're just like most domestic species. They've lost a lot of their fear of predators, especially humans, and so they...
Or the ability to do anything.
Right. They're just like, hey, I'm here and I eat.
Yeah. It's just a bit of feather. I thought they had fuzzy feet.
Fuzzy feet. We do have pigeons that have fuzzy feet, or feathery feet, but these guys do not.
Yeah.
No. And then, of course, this is the natural coloration. They have a black ring around their neck, and then you can actually see the ring on her neck as well. It's not.
Yeah,
she's not an albino.
She's
just white with like this off-white ring.
Interesting.
Yeah. Can you see? Oh, oops.
Thanks for missing me.
Can you see where their ears are?
There's that little flap of feather.
It's like what are those things? Muttons?
Muffs?
Mutton?
Mutton chops?
Yeah!
Ah.
It looks like
Yeah,
that
it's
to
got
me.
little mutton chops.
Yeah. We just recently got in another, I think it's an eastern collared dove, but it could also be a ringneck dove. I have to hear for the call before I can determine what they are. But might join these guys. I don't know if they'll accept them. I don't know if it's a male or female. But that's going to be exciting too. They can't be re-released. So if a rehabber gets one of these guys in, they can't re-release them because they're an invasive species.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No reason to do that. It's so interesting to me that one of the first and like most significant extinction stories we have in the U.S. is the passenger pigeon, which is just like, it's a pigeon. It's a dove. Like, they're should be good at surviving.
Yeah, it was just
We
intense
hit 'em
over
too hard,
hunting.
too fast.
Yeah, well, there are about 10 endangered species of pigeon doves. And then the two most popular ones that have gone extinct are the passenger pigeon, and do you guys know the other one?
No.
What's like the iconic extinct?
The dodo?
Yeah.
The dodo is a pigeon?
They think so.
It's like
yes.
like a flightless pigeon?
Yes.
Like a big, dumb
Big. Big. Oh, these guys. Are you making yourself pretty? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I bet you guys have heard these guys out in your yards. We have the mourning dove here in the States. I mean, they go they're the hoo 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 hoo. That's the mourning dove. And then these guys, they go hoo 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 hoo.
Yeah.
That's what these guys do to each other. And then the eastern collared doves, they go hoo 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 hoo
Okay.
hoo hoo over and over and over and over.
Those
and
all
over
sound
again.
familiar to me.
Yeah, they're all
Yeah.
over the place. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I
You
can't
can
quite tell what the new one is.
Interesting.
Till I hear it say
Yeah.
something. Thanks for holding my birds, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're so beautiful.
If you move super, super, super slow, you can pet them on their back.
I'm going to try because I really want to.
Can I pet you on your back? Here's my finger.
Here's my finger coming in.
It's like, I will scooch over here. He's like, okay. Or she's like, it's okay.
Yeah, moving slowly further away.
He knows their heads are
Right on the
constantly
edge of my
moving.
finger. You can come back this way now.
See how their heads start moving around? Their
Yeah.
heads, they bob their heads to help them see better. So they're,
Get a full picture of the
Yeah,
situation. Yeah, that's
what's
the edge of
going
my
on.
finger. You found it.
don't fall off. She sometimes has balance issues because of
Yeah.
her wing. Careful. There you go, guys.
Oh, I'm glad you guys have found friend.
Yeah.
You like each other, except for the nest hogging.
Disputes. Otherwise, the grooming is very cooperative and they're very sweet to each other.
That's
It's
very
just
nice.
yeah.
Cute. Cute. Kaya, Willow, thank you for coming on the show. Jessi, thank you for coming. If you want to see what
Thank you.
Jessi's up to, you can go to youtube.com/animalwondersmontana to see all the things that are happening at your educational outreach and rescue. And Cara, thank you so much for
Thanks for
sharing
having me.
and like helping me understand a little more about what goes into restoration and how much work is being done right now in restoration ecology.
Great.
And thanks to you for watching this episode of SciShow Talk Show. We're here occasionally, but always on SciShow. We've got new interesting things coming out, and appreciate you for watching. And you can find us at youtube.com/SciShow.